Hey class, it's Dr. Humpage here, burning some midnight oil, and third video here in the null and alternative hypothesis series. Right now we're going to look at the proper null and alternative hypotheses for a correlation. Again, a correlation is designed to look at the relationship between two sets of variables. Again, I'm not going to give you data here because I want you to think about this in the abstract. I know it's annoying not to see a picture, but this is a good exercise for you, I promise. Because, again, when we're looking at some of these data vignettes, we really want to think hard about what they're doing and what that data is going to look like, even before we look at the data table. But let's talk about a scenario where I could use a correlation to look at the relationship between the variables. So here, if you think back to that little video I did on mean, median, and mode, I had two lists of data. I had shooting percentages for 10 NBA players. So just imagine I took, at random, 10 players and looked at their shooting percentages over a full season, which is 82 games. So I guess I didn't take the most recent season because it got cut short with COVID. So let's say I took the 2018-2019 season. Took 10 players, played 82 games, and all of their shooting percentages, as you recall, was between 0.4 or 40% and 0.5 or 50%. And that makes sense because 50% is pretty good for the NBA in terms of shooting percentage. And 40% shooting is pretty bad by NBA standards. There's not a lot of margin for error there. If you can't shoot at a certain rate, boy, you better do a bunch of other things well or they're going to cut you. That's just how it goes. You might recall that I also collected data on the total points scored for each player on the season. My high scorer in the data set had 2,500 total points over 82 games. My lowest scorer had only 300 points over 82 games. I don't know why I have a question mark there, but we can fix that. All right, so think about that for a second, even before we get into the research question. You've got different shooting percentages that have a fairly narrow range, and you've got total point totals that have a fairly wide range. And we can start to think about why that might be. It makes sense why shooting percentage is fairly narrow, because it's the NBA. It's hard to get a shot off. I played basketball in college. If I stepped onto an NBA floor, I'd probably get my shot blocked pretty quickly. It's just a different level of play. It's elite level stuff. So even a really good player is not going to just dominate everyone. Even Michael Jordan or LeBron James, they don't get far above 50% as a shooting percentage. Even the most dominant players, they rarely get too far above 50. And then, on the flip side, really bad player in the NBA is still an amazing basketball player. So they're still probably going to be able to get some level of efficiency and shoot at sort of a floor level of about 40%. Occasionally you'll see someone dip below that who's like a rookie or just doesn't really know what they're doing yet. But most players are above 40. So that makes sense that range is narrow. Okay. So bear with me here because I think this is important to think about when you think about correlations. Because we want to think about what could happen, in our research scenario. If we think about point totals, we had a really wide range there. The high scorer had 2,500 total points. My lowest scorer had about 300 points. So why might that be? What would determine that? One could be, did the person play a lot? Are they that kind of a player that gets a lot of minutes and gets a lot of shots? I'm from Cleveland. We had this guy, LeBron James, who was pretty good at basketball. Our basic philosophy was like he's just going to do everything and score all the points and get all the rebounds and play all the defense. Kind of wore on him and he left, you might have heard. Luckily, he came back, though, just because he's a nice guy. But, yeah, some people might just get all the chances to score. Some people might be good shooters, but they can't get into the game for whatever reason. Maybe someone is a really awesome shooter, but they are kind of small and they're not very quick. And they just, it's hard to justify leaving them on the floor because even though they shoot well, they can't guard anybody. So, there might be some correlation that, guys that have a high shooting percentage tend to play a lot of minutes and then score a lot of points. There could be some exceptions to that rule, though. Shooting percentage alone probably isn't the determinant of how much you play. You probably want to have some other skills mixed in. On the flip side, we can maybe think about the position you play might have some impact on shooting percentage. So, guys that are centers or basically play inside, maybe they shoot a high percentage, but all they really do is like rebound and put the ball back up in layups and dunks. So they might have a high shooting percentage, but they might not score a lot of points because their role on the team is just to grab rebounds and pass it back to LeBron James. We definitely have had people in Cleveland that's all they did. And then if they tried to do anything else with it, the coach would take them out of the game for not passing it back to LeBron. But, okay, so we want to think about different outcomes. Before we even look at our data, we want to start to think about what are some reasons why a correlation could exist, a correlation could not exist. In this case, there's potentially a correlation here, but there's also some reasons why maybe there isn't a correlation. Moving on from that, my research question is simply just, what is the correlation between shooting percentage and total points scored in the National Basketball Association? And let's get down and talk about null and alternative hypothesis. Our null hypothesis, our HO, and I don't even go with nomenclature on this one. I wouldn't suggest that you do it either. I don't even know if there is nomenclature for the null hypothesis on a correlation. I've never encountered it. And I've always written it as simply there is no relationship between data set 1 and data set 2. Or there is no relationship between shooting percentage and total points scored. So that's the null hypothesis. That's like the no effect hypothesis. It means that one variable doesn't have a relationship to the other one, or it doesn't have an effect on the other one. Our alternative hypothesis then would be that there is a relationship between data set 1 and data set 2. Or, maybe if I actually wrote this incorrectly. Thank you. Control V. Important to edit your work, right? So let me start over here. There is a relationship between data set 1 and data set 2. That's an alternative hypothesis. Another way I could write it more specific to this research question would be that there is a relationship between shooting percentage and total points scored. So that's our change hypothesis or our effect hypothesis. And that's saying that there is something there. When we run this correlation procedure, which is a statistical procedure, and we put all the numbers into the formulas and we let Excel do the work, and it cranks out a correlation coefficient, we decide that, okay, based on this correlation coefficient, there's some kind of mathematical relationship between shooting percentage and total points scored. And so, if such a relationship were evident, we might conclude that, yes, if you shoot a higher percentage, chances are you're going to score more points. And that might be a function of you just making more of the opportunities that you get to shoot the basketball. It might be a function of you're just in the game longer and you're playing more minutes and you're just compiling more points for that reason. And that shooting percentage is one of the things that determines your minutes. It's hard to know really, Is there a really direct relationship? Does one cause the other, right? We can't determine that with a correlation. You've all heard that phrase, correlation does not equal causality, and that's kind of what we mean here, right? We know that there's some relationship between these two things, but we can't say for certain that just if someone has a high shooting percentage, that's going to lead them to score more points. There's a bunch of other variables that could come into play that I sort of talked about ad nauseum at the start of this video. And that's really important to remember when you're writing out these hypotheses, and also just how you write up, if you're choosing the data scenario that has a correlation procedure that you need to run, think about how you write it out. You don't want to be writing it in a way that suggests that a correlation is the cause of anything. Most of the things that we study in psychology are very hard to isolate. Most of the things we study are phenomena that have a lot of different variables or inputs into it. And causalities, it's actually a pretty rare thing in psychology. We deal with a lot of correlations, and we deal with a lot of looking at the relationships between different variables and how maybe two variables interact to increase the likelihood of something. So maybe in this case I could think about, well, supposing there is a correlation here between shooting percentage and total points, is shooting percentage alone enough to really increase the likelihood, or would like shooting percentage and maybe like overall athletic ability, the combination of those things, would that maybe have even a higher correlation? So we often stack variables and we look at ways to find what's most important when we're using correlation work. But okay, I'll stop there. I think you got what you need with your null and alternative hypothesis, and as always, ask me questions if you need as a result of looking at this video. Thank you.